Hey everyone, it's Joe Waxman, and I'm here with Melanie Brown Waxman. We have a long history together, as you probably can tell by the last names. I've known Melanie for a long time, and she's been a macrobiotic teacher and chef for many years. Um, so, hi Melanie, welcome, and um, I just want to hear you tell your story a bit from the beginning. So, how did it all start for you in this macrobiotic journey, and just tell us where it all began.
Okay, hi Joe, lovely to see you here from hot Spain, and hello to everyone else. So I actually want to go way back to when I was born, which sounds funny, but I was born in England in February, and it's pretty cold and damp there. And my mother, after I was only a few weeks old, my mother put me outside every day in a pram. And when I was older and had my own children, I reflected on that and thought, wow, that must have been really cold for me as a baby. So I said to Mum, why would you do that, Mum? It was so cold for me. And she said, not at all. You loved it and you'd sleep the whole time. And I think that was my sort of beginning strong connection to the natural world. And even to this day, I still, when I, may feel stressed or need to think about something or ponder on something outside, I always go outside. And even when I was a little older, maybe about eight years old, and I had a little pony, and I used to gallop around by myself in the fields. And I had this very strong connection to, whether we want to say higher power or, universal wisdom. And of course, I didn't really understand it, but I would, go home and I'd say to my parents, how come we can't thank God in the fields? I never really understood why you had to go to a church, as people did, or some other, established building to say thanks. Because to me, being outdoors just had this incredible sense of connection and a feeling of wellness. But what was interesting is I didn't really have any connection to food, as nourishment beyond being a little kid eating. And when I was 12, Mum actually had a macrobiotic meal cooked by a friend of mine, who's a friend of mine now. And she came home and said, oh, I just had seaweed for lunch. And of course I was 12 and I was like, what? That sounds gross. And she said, no, not at all. It was really delicious. So I think even that little kind of nudge in the direction was made at that point. Then when I became 16, and I still to this day can't remember where this book appeared from or if a friend had it. And it was a book by one of the Sam brothers, I think. I can't even remember the book, to be honest, but it was a macrobiotic book. And in there, of course, it talked about diet number 7, only eating grains and making gamasio. So I was like all for this, because at this age was when I started to kind of go downhill with body image, rejecting the self. And so I thought, oh, this will be great. So I made brown rice and I made some weird version of gamasio. I don't even remember how I made it. And I tried to do it. But the thing was, it said something like eat small amounts. So the amount I ate was minuscule with probably equal amounts of gamasio. And so I managed to do it for about a day. Or actually, I think I managed to do it for 3 days. But on day 3, Mum bought some really nice cookies home and I just ate those and that was the end of it. But again, there must have been a little message in there that I started to think about. Rather sadly, after that, my relationship with food really deteriorated. And I actually, I think it was it sounds really ages ago, in 1978, got bulimia, or eating disorder. Now, the interesting thing about that was it didn't exist as a disease at that time. There was no name for it. It was actually discovered in 1979. So it's very interesting that, you can actually get something that was not yet discovered in the medical sense. It was a real dark time for me. I was in the fashion world. I tried to restrict and restrain and control and put a lot of pressure on myself. And then what was interesting was that, and in terms of, if we look in macrobiotic terms of yin and yang, it was incredible yang I put on myself. But then there would be something in my brain, like a rebellious child in the brain would suddenly go, who are you doing this for? Why are you controlling your food like this? We can just eat what we want. We can have anything we want. And then I would go to the other extreme and be really gleeful. Do you know what I mean? So it was a dark time. I never took my coat off during the day. You know, I had terrible shame. I never spoke about this. In fact, I haven't spoken about this pretty much until recently. Really, it was a great, very difficult time. But my nature, I think, is a seeker. I think if I lived in another life, I'd probably be on one of those ships discovering new lands or something, you know, because I was always seeking. And before macrobiotics, I came across a book. It was called Fat is a Feminist Issue. Really super helpful to me. And if in that time, in the late 70s, therapy in England was not a common word. It wasn't used. So there wouldn't, for me to go to a therapist would have been a complete and utter disaster. And anyway, no one knew that I had a problem because I looked okay, I was super outgoing and so forth. So this book really helped a lot. And then when I met my boyfriend, Pat, he'd been macrobiotic and he was the guy who actually cooked for Mum when I was 12. So he was like 6 years older than me. And so when I met him, just one day I said something about my weight and he said, oh, if you want to maintain your weight, just eat macrobiotics.
Right.
For me, it wasn't a question of like, oh, really? That's kind of weird. Or, I was like, okay, literally like that. Okay. I didn't have a clue about cooking that kind of food. Actually, I was a very good cake maker and icing wedding cakes. And, I wanted to be a cordon bleu chef. So it was sort of slipped in right before I went down that route. Yeah. And I can still remember he lived in this old house in Bath in England, which is beautiful. And one day he said to me, can you soak these aduki beans? Because I've got to go somewhere. I don't know what he meant. So in the pot was probably about, I don't know, let's say a cup or two of aduki beans. And I must have put 12 cups of water. Like literally, there was so much water because I didn't know what he was talking about.
Right.
And he was great. He never, and he used to grind his own tahini with his stone mill, and the food tasted fantastic. And I can honestly say the first sensation I felt was increased energy and a sense of joy. Real, from this very dark time in my life to suddenly this kind of sense of joy and energy from experiencing this kind of food. And then he had a book by Nietzsche and I picked it up, and then it became much more interesting to me because then I started reading more. And the next thing I think that was incredibly important for me was taking responsibility for my health. Because that was never discussed when you were, in England at that time. You're responsible. Doctors were kind of gods. And I was lucky that my parents, and my father, you remember him, but my father taught us to question everything. And interesting enough, to take responsibility for our mistakes, but it didn't kind of extend into food. So when I realized that I could be responsible for my health, that was a huge shift for me. Very empowering, actually.
It is, yeah, I agree with that.
And then, so then I started to become a bit interested in the cooking part, obviously. And I had a book by Michelle Abacera, and that was the only book I really used. And because I was living in London, I started cooking for everyone. My brother, Simon, friends of ours. And of course, I was like 21. So all my friends were quite happy to get some free food, so they were really into it.
Yeah.
So again, from a very early stage, I never had to worry. People say, oh, what about your social life? I never felt like it was hampered at all, because I just enjoyed trying these dishes and making lots of things. And I then decided to, and I can't remember why, but someone suggested this shiatsu course, like a weekend course, right? And it was at the Community Health Foundation, which was started by Bill Tara in London. And then your father actually was the director when I went there. And funny enough, when I first went there, he'd been deported back to America. Something happened with the papers. So Yeah, your mum and him were both meant to be there. You guys too. But I think you had to go back for a few weeks. I don't remember the exact story, but anyway.
Don't even remember that, but yeah.
So I went to the shiatsu course. Oh my God. It was kind of an intense course by this great guy called Simon Bailey. But the pressure points, and you know about shiatsu, the pressure points that we learned, the idea was to press them as hard as you possibly
That's
can.
what I was imagining, like really torturing and pressing really hard.
Terrible. So the first day, it was a weekend. So the first day we all did this, and then I'm not kidding you, we came in looking like we'd run a marathon. My God, I was in so much pain. And you know, for a long time I hated shiatsu. I couldn't receive it because I think I was sensitive anyway. And I can remember when I was studying at the CHF, there were some great characters, but John Sandifer was very good with massage, and he used to ask for, you know, people to come to practice, for him to practice on. And for me, and you know, we all know massage, you're meant to be zen and quiet, but with me, he would talk the whole time and actually helped me because it sort of took away that, you know, and he was very gentle. So I started to be able to accept it again. It was interesting. But at the end of that shiatsu course, Simon Bailey was also teaching cooking. So he said, oh, you know, I was the only macrobiotic person on the course, I think. And he said, oh, would you like to come to my cooking class? And I really honestly wasn't being arrogant, but I didn't understand about cooking. So I said, oh, it's okay, I know how to cook, because I had this Michelle Abasera book.
Right.
And then he said, well, if you come to cooking, you may see other things that you didn't kind of see before. So like I said, I was very open. So I said, okay, yeah, I'll try it. Yeah. And of course, that's where I started to really become interested. And then your parents came and they ran the center. And just one other thing, and you know, about it was funny because I started to work there. In fact, I helped run the counselling office. It was very well organised, this centre. And your mum used to cook the lunch for the people who worked there, which was fantastic. And the first day, now you have to remember, I'm 21, right? So the first day there, I'm wearing a red mini skirt with a red t-shirt with big yellow and green spots and everyone else is kind of very zen in white and all this stuff, you know. So I walk into the cooking school where the lunch was, and it was dead silent, you know, and nobody was speaking, and everyone's looking quite pained and chewing like mad, but not really with enjoyment. It was more kind of this dead silencing, and I was like looking around and feeling a bit awkward.
Trying really hard to be enlightened, I guess.
Exactly, trying way too hard. So I sat down and I sat next to this guy from America called Russell. And so we're sitting there, and I think he was sort of a bit more like me. So he suddenly leant over and he whispered in my ear, he said, see that bag of rice in the corner? That's just for you. And of course it made me laugh. And then I said to him, because your mum had made this great big pot of miso soup, and I said, I see the soup on the stove, that's just for you. So we started kind of going back and forth and laughing, and everyone looked a bit horrified, only for a few minutes. And then suddenly everyone else started talking, and I think from that point, those meals never were that kind of awkward chewing.
Nice.
Yeah, it really changed. So it was interesting.
Right, so you lived with us for a while. You lived at our house, and you were a babysitter.
Not in England. I didn't live there, but I did come to your house quite a lot. And I took you, the three of you, to the museum once. I don't know, you're probably really young, but I did. I took you to the, I think.
At least, yeah, you watched us. I remember you being there.
Yeah, because
I remember watching Top of the Pops with you, I think.
Yes, it was afterwards. You're right. Oh, wow, that's really funny. Yes, we went to a museum first. I took you, I can't remember if it was the Natural History or the Natural Science Museum, but we went there first. But, you know, I think what's important for everyone to understand about those early days, which I really hope sort of comes back a bit more, was the sense of magic, the sense of mystery around, you know, food and eating and nourishment, because that's what really attracted me. You know, this idea of like, we don't really know how healing works. We don't really know, you know, about how food exactly affects our body. And I think with macrobiotics, that was that great kind of creative, even slightly more, you know, feminine way of looking at food and nutrition. Today, I'm not saying, you know, but I notice it in macrobiotics, it's become very dry, even talking all the time about the nutrients and what's in there, and, you know, and that would never have attracted me back then. And I think that we have a gift with that magic, you know, that happens.
There was like a really strong spirit back then that was attractive to you. But
Sorry.
what about the diet? What, like, it was really overly simplistic and contracted back then, right?
Okay, so when I started, before I started, well, actually up to starting studying. So for me, it was broad because I was living on sort of an apple and some ridiculous thing on this, you know, crazy diet. So for me, it was broadening out at first. And I think I lived on brown rice and carrot, kimpira, and some other things. And then I can remember I must have had some, you know, I got kind of sick and I was really feeling really lightheaded and spaced out. And the friend Pat, who introduced me, because his cooking was very broad. So up to that point, I was doing pretty well. He used much more oil and nice sauces and bread and all this stuff. He said to me, I think you need some jam, you know, jelly. He was trying to think of something, I guess, when I talked to him on the phone. And I was like, jam? You can't have that. It's far too yin, you know, like I was really moralistic. And then I remember going on my bike across the park and buying some sort of something like apple concentrate, because in those days you couldn't really get the fresh juice, you know. And I drank the whole thing, and then I suddenly felt way better. You know what I mean? I was like,
right.
Good. So then when I started studying, again, you know, you would hear these things, oh, if you eat, you know, fruit, it does this. If you have bread, it creates more mucus. So I just cut them all out, because in my mind, again, sort of that young, focused approach is, you know, it's a system. You control it, you get rid of it, it works. It's a perfect diet. You're going to be perfect, which just doesn't exist.
Right. Yeah.
So then I was doing okay with that and still feeling great and high on life. And I was really being into super grateful for everything. You know, I used to work at the Financial Times, and I rode my bike across London, and I'd be like high on, like, I'm so grateful for everything and my parents and grandparents and all this. But then one day I went back home to Mum's, and she was making something. Oh, by the way, for us, something naughty would be bread with tahini and miso spread on it.
Yeah.
So
quite different than it is today. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went home, and my mum was making a regular cake, and I can remember I sort of went a bit crazy and started eating like a nutcase again. So of course I felt very like, oh, there's no hope for me, you know, having studied all this thing, and here I am like, oh, you know, I can't even stick on macrobiotics. Da, da, da. And that night I went to this, my friend was singing in the Baroque choir at this huge event, you know, in one of the big concert halls in London, sorry. So I went there, and I was sitting there, and I, you know, it was almost like a boulder was on my head, and I was feeling totally like, oh, hopeless, and didn't like myself, sort of thing. And I got a very strong message to go see your father for counseling. Now, in those days, nobody did that unless you had some serious problem, because again, it was more about doing things on your own. And if you did that, you were not with the program. But the message was super strong. And I'd always had this ability to sort of attract things or manifest. You're like, this is, and again, usually outdoors, but there was a funny one, just an off track, which you probably find amusing, that when I was riding my horse one day, I really had very strong desire to see the Rolling Stones, and the concerts were all a sellout. And in my head, I was like, I'm going to see them. When I got home, a friend called. He said that I heard there's one ticket left, or there's tickets left being sold by Yehudi Menuhin, the pianist. This pianist or violinist. And so I called him up. There was one ticket left. I said, I get it. My mother had a friend who was driving to London that night. I went with that friend and I got that ticket. And I saw the Stones 3 times that year. So I had this kind of ability to attract. So when I got this strong message to go and see Denny, I thought to myself, okay, I'll follow this.
Yeah.
And this is the funny part. So this counseling session, he, first of all, they asked me if I wanted someone in the session, and I said no, but for some reason they didn't hear no, so someone went with me, which was super embarrassing because I didn't want to talk about my problem in front of somebody. The second thing is I wrote it all down very carefully because, like I said, there wasn't a name for it. I still didn't know the name, so I wrote, I eat lots of food, and of course I'm still really embarrassed about doing this. It was like a great shame. So I went and I sat there, and your dad, he looked at this paper for about, it seemed like a long time. He looked at me and he said, I'm sorry, I can't read what you've written. So I had to speak it, right? And meanwhile, the assistant was sitting there nodding her head, trying to be empathetic. And I'm thinking, I'd rather dig a hole and jump into it and hide. But he made me talk it through. Now, later, I thought he was like a god. I thought, oh my God, he knew exactly to make me express myself, to talk about it. And I asked him a long time after, after he said, no, I actually couldn't read your writings.
Right.
it wasn't this kind of very clever technique he used. But what was the reason I brought this up, because you talked about the strict diet. What was amazing about your dad at that time, I had gone in there believing that he was going to tell me to eat rice for the rest of my life. And I was willing to try, right? I was saying, okay, he's going to tell me this, I know. He did the exact opposite and actually made my diet super broad. Like sake and tangerines. In those days, tangerines were even a big deal. But he really, all kind, not just rice, bread and tahini and all kinds of things. I never forget how happy I was leaving that. But the funny thing was, I still did it in a very young way, because I actually figured, he said something like sake twice a week and tangerines twice a week. So I made it, okay, I'd have sake on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and I'd have tangerines on a Monday. So there
you're describing my dinner these days, sake and tangerines, by the way.
But what was very interesting, because I had that will that I mentioned earlier, which is, again, a kind of masculine, very young thing, it started to break down, and I couldn't do that anymore. And so I went through a phase which was very uncomfortable for me, of sort of just not being able to stop eating, but at the same time not going too crazy, if that makes sense. So in those days, and you were young, I don't know if you remember, they had the best rice syrup. Some of these breast products disappeared.
Oh, I do. I totally remember that. I mean, they're the best products back then. That they've all gone downhill since then.
It's so sad. But I remember eating a jar of rice syrup with a spoon one day.
We used to steal it. That was my little story. We would steal the rice syrup because we weren't allowed any. We'd steal the whole jar, eat it with our hands, and then stick it in the drawer to spill over.
I had a friend, I don't know if you remember her, Shanti, her name was, but she said they had a big container of it on the top shelf in the larder, and she was trying to steal it too, and it fell on her head.
Oh my God.
Can you imagine? But anyway, so one day I was a bit fed up about this, going crazy, and I talked to your mum, actually, and she was like, are you happy? And I said, well, not really, because I have no will anymore and I can't stop doing this thing. She said, well, congratulations. And she said, now you can start to eat more balanced because your will is breaking down, so you've got to go through this part, but then you'll find afterwards, it'll balance out. And that's what happened, actually.
That's good advice. I agree.
Yeah, it was really good advice. But unless you have a question, I was going to just talk a bit about the cooking part.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I absolutely loved the cooking, because for me, it brought something that I never sort of experienced before. And it was this kind of reverence for food, reverence for this food that comes from the earth. And that when you're in the kitchen, that whole experience was kind of Zen. Again, I think we've lost a bit of it over the years, but I understand not everybody wants to do that, but for me, it was beautiful, that you went in there and you really kind of had this reverence for the vegetables, how they were washed, how they were placed on the cutting board, how they were cut. It made you very in the moment. And it also helped just this sense of kind of wonder, again, the magic part, the, you know, understanding that those subtle things did make a difference. And that's more about nourishment to me than nutrition. It's about nourishing the soul, nourishing beyond just having some good protein and fats and all these things. And I think we all know this, we can't prove it, but we know that if the food is cooked with more love, you feel the difference, you really do. And I think that was something that you know, we put love into cooking, yes, you know, traditional cooking they all do, but it was a little bit more than that when I started to study, you know, that everything it was kind of respected, and there was a gratitude for where it came from, and, you know, this connection to the earth. And that part, I think, was amazing, really.
I agree, and I include that in some of my videos. I talk about respecting your food, because you're eating it and it's becoming a part of you. And if you're not respecting your food, you're not respecting yourself, and it's going to carry out into everything. You're not going to respect other people. I firmly believe that. I
totally agree, and also it's why it makes us here. What we eat makes us on this earth. We can't. I mean, okay, there's breatharians, but I mean the amount is minuscule. But I mean, for most of us, it's so magical that we have this incredible, especially when we have it straight from the earth. We're connecting to our source, where, you know, the reason we're here, we can't be here without that. And I think there's a lack of respect now for food, which is very sad.
Oh yeah, totally. I fully agree with that. I think that's very important. So we know that you married my father, and I lived with you guys for a number of years. But what were and there's so many years we're obviously not going to cover all of it, but what were some of the key things in those years regarding macrobiotics? My father was teaching and counseling, and you were doing a lot of cooking, but what were some things you want to tell us about all
that? Yeah, that was a great time, and it was also quite tough for me. The first thing was, I think I was still very much in my head. Almost my body was a life support for the brain. Do you know what I mean? I wasn't kind of in the body. And I think eating disorders, that's a big part of it. And I think what saved me was spending time outdoors, and actually then having a lot of children. It was, you know, that really brought me down to earth, grounded. But, you know, moving to a foreign country, I moved with your dad when I was only about 24. And, you know, that was pretty young. I had no other family that I knew, you know, of course, I had you guys, and then I had Elisa, she was a baby. But then the programs, we developed some great programs, and they were fun. I mean, I did love them, and we had the study house, and I think people can really change when you have that kind of an environment, when people are living, you know, in the house. And there was a lot of support from the macrobiotic community. The community was strong then, if you remember.
I do. Argyle Road with the, you know, Marilyn and Geraldine, and there was a lot of people.
Elaine and Jasper used to do those dinners, and Michael Kessler was around the corner. It was a lot. There was really good support, very nourishing in that sense. I think, though, I was a bit isolated in terms of real America, because everybody at that time that I pretty much hung out with was macrobiotic. I'm not saying it's good or bad, it just was, you know. And of course, you have lots of brothers and sisters, you know that, which was a lot of fun. Again, I loved it. I loved it with all the kids and doing things. And we used to go on those picnics, and, you know, we had a lot of fun doing that. But it was probably also quite tough for me, I think.
Because, it's a hard work.
Yeah. And what I did to nourish beyond food was, and I don't know if you remember this, I was really into my garden, and I was really into painting, and I used to go to these art classes a few times a week at night, and that really made a difference. You know, again, I was a bit seeking. At first I used to get a bit fed up, I think, and then I thought, okay, well, this is pointless, you being fed up. You've got to look and seek and find things that kind of broaden your life. which is what I did. So that was really good. We had some really, really good programs, but as I said, most of them were in the house. It wasn't really a big video world then, do you think? I mean,
no, it was very much in person, everything.
Yes, which I did really like. And then the summer camps were sort of going down at that point. But they were, no, the ones up in Beckett weren't. I mean, up in Massachusetts, they were still going, but the ones in Pennsylvania,
Mid-Atlantic,
the Mid-Atlantic ones didn't continue. But they were also great fun, those summer conferences.
They were great fun.
Yeah, and that was really, I enjoyed that very much. I didn't get to travel as much as probably I would have liked, but that was understandable for those times with having lots of kids.
Yeah.
It was. I think that was quite a high time in macrobiotics, don't you?
It was. I mean, there was such an activity, a buzz. A lot of it was centered around the Kushis teaching, at least on the East Coast. So much activity going on, and what do you think was the difference then versus now? I mean, what?
I don't know. It's interesting because I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking, and then cooking to me was just like pure art, really. Yeah. I mean, I was playing with colors and shapes and different dishes, and it was endless for me. I just felt, the creativity was incredible.
And the dinners back then were very elaborate.
Very.
I mean, the thing was, you did spend like a long time cooking dinner, not just you, but everyone did back then.
Everyone did. Yeah, we had, a soup, a grain, and 3 side dishes every day. And then sometimes a dessert, but lunch I think was a little more simple, but still, there was still, and even breakfast had a certain amount. It was definitely, as I loved it, it was okay. But now I think the world's gone faster. I don't think.
Different.
Yeah, even in that amount of time, it's incredible. So now it seems to have got very dispersed for me. I don't know how you feel because you're in Philly. Maybe you don't feel that. In Spain, because I'm living in Spain, for those that don't know, macrobiotics is very active. It's interesting. The center in Valencia that's run by Patricia Restrepo does incredible. It has lots of people. They have a cooking school, and then lots of small places who offer classes and things like that throughout Spain. It's very interesting. They're very creative with food. Like, the dishes look fantastic. It's a slightly different style than you and I, learned or developed.
Right.
But very, very creative, very artistic approach. And then Portugal's super busy too. The center there is very active. So it's interesting. Whereas I'm not so sure, like I said, I haven't got my finger on the American pulse at the moment. I think it's first, isn't it?
I mean, I guess so. It depends. I only know my world.
Yes, we can only know our world.
Hey, is it dispersed? Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not what it was, but maybe there's a resurgence, and maybe there's different factors. It's
yes,
really
I think the movement, is going through something. Maybe it's a growing phase, and then you go to the next one.
I'm trying to get the word out, so at least there's that.
Really good. Well, I after your father and I split up, I actually did something which was quite different, and that was I really got into massage. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because it wasn't something that was in the forefront before, but I actually stayed doing that for 15 years. It's quite a long time to be giving massage, but at least, I can't remember if it's 4 times a week or 5 times a week. Yeah, really. That's a lot.
Yeah.
But I was careful because you can get burnt out easily.
Right.
But I really learned about touch in a different way. I think it was a fantastic experience for me. And I do like to be the best I can be. Doesn't mean perfect at all.
Right.
The best I can be. And so I really learned a lot from that. I'm super grateful. And the people I worked with, I loved. Really, really good people. So that was interesting. And then I decided in my mind, I really wanted to learn about counseling. Again, I wanted to be the best I could be with counseling. there was a bit of an old boys club with macrobiotics. You know what I mean? It was like the men did the counseling and the teaching and the women did the cooking and in the kitchen sort of thing. I mean, it really wasn't really, it's changed now, but it was.
Right.
And so, you know, counseling by women was not so the norm. I don't know the right word. And so I decided that, and, you know, again, I sort of have this manifesting ability, and this work came up at SHA, the wellness clinic here in Spain. It's a fantastic, really fantastic experience for me. It's a very beautiful building. The food is gorgeous. You know, we have all medicinal drinks there that the guests have, and a bit like a study house, all the guests get to experience the food day in, day out. You know, most people will stay a week, some people 2 weeks, some people for months. So we get very good results because they are actually experiencing the food. And that's, you know, hopefully, can't say always, but hopefully that's all they're having. And you see a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So I might see the lower end would be 50 a week. Low end.
So what do you mean? So you're counseling 50 people a week? Wow.
Yeah,
full on consultations?
No, they vary. So there's full on, there's follow up just to see how they're doing while they're there. And when they leave, we do another session to give, you know, encourage them to improve their diet and lifestyle when they leave. So a person usually has 3 sessions in the week. If they're there longer, they'll have more follow-ups just to make sure they're doing okay. But can be very intense because if it's really busy, you could be seeing 20 people in a day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you like that?
I love the people are fantastic because I see people from all over the world.
Nice.
And it's just super interesting. You meet so many great people, and also it's learning to really be more flexible. We can't make people eat how we eat.
Right.
You know? It's actually meeting them where they're at, cheerleading them on their journey, walking beside them on the journey, or being their best friend, whatever it is, to help them to you know, move in a direction that's towards more health and happiness, really.
Yeah.
So some people they're not coming there specifically to have some huge change to their diet. Do you see what I'm saying? So then you have to kind of negotiate a bit, which is interesting.
So it's more of an inclusive approach, like adding healthy foods rather than
adding
limiting
healthy foods. Maybe, you know, the key I think is quality, and I'm sure you agree, the quality of foods.
Quality of foods.
Yeah, less of some things, you know, increasing all those sort of things. And we do have really good results. I mean, people who stay there, their blood pressure will go down, the diabetes, blood sugar levels will stabilize. We have really good results like that, weight loss. And, you know, a big part of it for all of us is about stress. I know we hear it all the time, but if you're operating, let's say, from even a low level of stress, it affects how your body metabolizes, how you calorie burn, how you digest, how you assimilate. So, you know, even if you're eating the best food on the planet and you eat too quickly, that puts your body into a more stressed state. So even encouraging someone to enjoy a meal, eat slower, to develop, like we said earlier, a love of food, a relationship with food, pleasure about eating, all those things can make a big difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree. And are you teaching classes as well as counseling?
We did. At the moment, it's on a sort of hiatus, but we're coming back to it. But we used to teach a lot of different classes too to the guests. Or, you know, anything from diagnosis to foods for travel. You know, people travel a lot. You know, some people are on planes all the time. So we do that. We used to do a sharing table at night that was fun too, where you would sit with the guests and then they could ask questions about the meal and foods, and it was more sort of informal. So we have that. It's really definitely more about trying to educate, not just telling people what to do, you know?
Right. Yeah. That's a good approach, I think. And
empowering the person, because it's not really us. We're just guides or mentors or, you know, a teacher. We can use different hats, I think, but, you know, we're not there to fix the client. you know.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Um,
And I
so
think, oh,
yeah.
sorry.
No,
No,
go ahead.
well, now I've
Well,
forgotten. What were you going to say?
so I was just saying, you're doing this counseling at Shaw in Spain. Are you traveling anywhere these days?
No, not so much. Not for teaching.
Okay.
No, because this is quite intense. It's like 5 days a week. At the moment, of course, we're on lockdown. Well, we're not, but it's sort of that in between before it opens up again, which is
Oh, yeah.
interesting for me because it's probably the first time in my adult life I've actually not worked.
Uh-huh. Uh,
So it's quite good. Um, but no, I'm not traveling so much. It's mostly that I do feel very strongly that, as we talked about nourishment, that we need to be nourished on all levels. So I spend a lot of time hiking, hiking in the mountains with my dogs, in my garden, swimming, because I feel that that makes it possible for me to do the work I do, because it is quite intense. And so
right. Yeah. You
you
always
have
did
to,
have a love for nature and
like
outdoors,
I
and
say, yeah.
So yeah, talk
So,
about that.
yeah, so and it's almost like I do walking meditation. I love to be up there, and it's just this incredible countryside here. It's more arid, more dry, but it's very mountainous. I
Uh-huh.
have mountains all around me. I have three sides mountains and the other sea. So, and I find all these things, and I'm always discovering new paths and finding new places. And so it's really, that's fantastic for me. Keeps my energy up. Yeah, I would say.
Well, what else is there, Melanie? I mean, are you involved in something? Do you have another project going on, or?
The only other thing I'm doing, which has been really, really great, is, and I think I might have mentioned it to you before, but I'm studying the psychology of eating, which is really mind blowing.
That is
And
interesting.
yeah, it's has a lot of similarities to what we, have taught in the past, but it kind of goes a bit deeper and a bit further and a bit more embracing, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh.
And definitely there's more emphasis on, universal wisdom, body wisdom, really bringing that out more strongly, I think, or, what he calls the feminine archetype of nutrition.
So who is it, and what's it called?
It's called, well, the course is Mind Body Eating Coach, but it's the psychology of eating is the place, and his name is Mark David.
Huh.
Actually, on YouTube, he has some really interesting little videos, so you can have a check them out.
Oh yeah.
But the approach is great. There's a softness to it too. He's always like the way he speaks, and he always thanks everyone for being there, and there's a lot of that in there. I think he did eat macrobiotics for a while. He was at Cropolo. He's done a lot of stuff, actually. Yeah.
That sounds interesting. I want to check it out.
Yeah, check it out. You would love it. I'm not kidding you. I love it. And sometimes I have to stop because it's looking at things from a completely different way, but the same, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I appreciate different perspectives, and I think one of the things that I would like to add to sort of the macrobiotic view is that we don't have to invalidate other ways of looking at life or food or anything else in order for macrobiotics to be legitimate and valid. There can be more than one valid approach, and different styles, different expressions, different perspectives.
That's exactly what he says. That's exactly what he says. And he said there's nuggets of wisdom in everything, and you can just find those in any diet. Even you can find a nugget of wisdom.
Yeah.
He's the same. He's saying, you can't expect someone to eat the way you eat.
Right.
Doesn't mean that they're not going to, but you can't. That's not an expectation. It's really helping them on their journey. And he said sometimes they may need to hold on to their weight for longer. It's for their learning.
Right.
Who are we to say that they have to lose the weight now, or they have to be cured this second? It's about their learning and their journey. Sometimes we have to, continue with something to keep us kind of on our toes. If everything disappeared overnight, then what would we have learned? Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I think the way I see it is that we have like this soul, and we're not always sort of fully aware of our soul's journey, but it has its own journey.
Totally.
Melanie, I have one pointed question kind of regarding macrobiotics, and I want to hear your take on what you think the greater macrobiotic community needs in order to sort of grow and evolve? Like what's that one critical thing that you think you could point out?
It's a good question, actually. And I've been thinking about this recently. I mean, you know that in the greater world, let's say, macrobiotics is considered a diet. Mm-hmm. You know, that's what people, I mean, it's well known as a diet. Mm-hmm. So there's two ways you could go. We could either go and really make that a great understanding of food, because we have it already. You know what I mean? But really refine that, make it really something that people could understand very deeply. Or we need to broaden it and bring in more, like I say, about the magic of it, the wisdom, bring that more in, the bigger picture, not such a recent focus that's so dry to me is on this scientific thing, you know, trying to, you know, prove that macrobiotics works. How are you going to prove it?
But don't you think some people need the science? They just want that?
I don't think it should be taken out completely. I think it definitely needs to be there, but not overly emphasized above the other. It's like standing on one leg instead of two. Do you know?
Yeah.
So no, totally agree with you. Some people, they feel comfortable with that, and that's fine. But I think it's also to kind of really, you know, bring in the magic side, and to honor that more spiritual aspect that sometimes I think people are a bit afraid of. They don't want to say, you know, talk about energy and things that we all loved when we were in the early days, because they're afraid people are going to say, well, how can you prove it? But it's not about proof, because your body, my body, we're different. You know, we can't eat exactly the same food and measure it out and have this. I think the mistake with macrobiotics was making that diet plate, saying everybody has to have 60% grains, and because, you know, that doesn't work for many people.
Right. Yeah.
You know, men and women are different, and how you view, you know, how you are and how I am. And, you know, I think we have to, you know, honor those things. And that's why I'm saying we could do that. To get the community together is a tough one, because I think at the moment, everyone's convinced that their way is the way. And like you said, you know, there isn't one way. And I think if we could be a bit more acknowledging of each other's difference, it may be better.
Yeah. Those are key points. And I think that they go hand in hand with just becoming more of a mature person, you know, totally. And growing.
I was going to say, stepping into big boy pants at this point, you know.
Yeah. Good points. No, and I totally agree. I mean, it's not just all nutrition, you know, it's not just all science and what is this nutrition, what is that, what, you know, that's a part of it, but there is more, and that's what separates macrobiotics from, you know, what the doctors are doing. Exactly. The doctors are purely looking at nutrition and medical, you know, literature and all that.
And interestingly, that's the masculine archetype of nutrition, which is masculine based. It's not feminine archetype. So all that, you know, heroic exercise, like we saw on that group today, you know, person in the gym frantically, that's masculine, you know, muscles, masculine, you know, the regime, weighing yourself on the scales, all that stuff. And I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's too much that way. And there's not enough of the magic, the flow, the understanding of energy, the seasons, the cooking, you know, the nourishment, the relishing the meal, all that.
Yeah, I could see that. I could see how that is lacking, and I think I agree with that. So, Melanie, what else do you have to say for yourself about just anything and just life in general? What message do you have for people?
Well, I think, you know, the key is that we're all on our journey. The journey is not for perfection. We're not going to find the ultimate, the perfect body, the perfect partner, the perfect house, and the perfect lifestyle. I think we have to understand it's a journey, and that journey has challenges, and that's part of it, and that is actually the fun of it. And we didn't really talk about children, but, you know, if you have children, just to, you know, let them learn a little bit too. Don't be too constrictive, because I think there's a back to that. You know,
don't be too restrictive.
Yeah, because I think kids need to, you know, enjoy, and, you know, just learning. There's different ways to eat. There's sustainable diet, that's our daily food. Then there's special occasion foods, there's foods to have on a weekend, which can be quite different. There can be an experimental phase where you're experimenting with something.
Right, yeah.
Could be therapeutic, where you decide, okay, for a few days I'm going to be really careful. I think there was a problem in the earlier days of macrobiotics with people when they did get better from, say, cancer, being stuck on the therapeutic for way too long, you know,
Yeah.
and moving to sustainable. Sustainable is what we want to be enjoying, you know.
Yeah, and that takes often many years to find that for yourself, you know, what works and what doesn't.
Totally. But I think there was a little bit of, and it's understandable, you know, people got better and then they were afraid, and then that brought back more problems, you know, because I think we want to be able to enjoy. And, you know, the ultimate thing is learning how to relax. And this is for something that's ongoing, in my opinion, for me anyway, because I have a very quick mind. I like to get things done, and you know, I can be too much that way. So I'm learning.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm learning to eat slower. I'm learning to, you know, try to be more relaxed into uncertainty, because we can't be certain in life, really. We can't. We can have an idea, but it doesn't always come out exactly what we thought. So I think if I gave a message, I would say to people, really learn about relaxing, being patient, slowing down. It's not always easy, and you're not meant to suddenly do it overnight, but just to, you know, observe, notice, you know.
Observe, that's good. And I've been utilizing that advice for myself. I'm like, I really have to practice what I preach, and eat slower and chew my food, because my tendency, as you know, is to what did you call me when I was a kid? Motor mouth.
Motor mouth.
Motor mouth.
I can, yes, I'm too fast as well. And, you know, even like listen to music, beautiful music, something that helps, you know, just to slow down. It's not about only chewing. I think it's, you know, that can be a bit boring. Like I said, you sit there just munching away, but it could be just stopping and taking a deep breath, or, you know, like I say, putting on music that's relaxing, looking at your environment could be beautiful, you know, all those things. I think it helps a lot.
Yeah. Well, Melanie, all great stuff. I don't know. Do you have anything else for us, or?
I think I've rabbited on enough. I hope people get something from it. And it was great talking to you, really.
Yeah, it's really been good talking to you too. And I have my little plug. I got my themacrobioticdiet.com new website. Check it out. Check out my YouTube. Like, subscribe, share. Melanie, any final things you want to share?
Only I'm just chuckling a bit about when you used to sleep in the barn. You were strong. Do you remember that?
I did. I went through my phases, and
you decided you wanted to sleep outdoors, and good for you, huh? Connecting to nature. It was cold out there.
That was fun.
I did an eco psychology, and the guy was amazing. It was like, and he was 80 years old, and he slept outdoors every single night, and he lived in somewhere like, I can't remember, Washington State. But every night he slept outdoors, and he'd come in and do other stuff on the computer. He was a great guy. Cold
therapy, you know, the Russians know that. You just remember Natasha, cold water over the head, you know.
Good for the immune. All right, Joe. Well, really great talking to you. I loved it.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, hope to see you soon.
All right, thanks, Melanie.
Bye.